Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Digital Empathy Lounge, brought to you by Analytics. The Digital Empathy Lounge is a podcast series exploring the next and best practices in experience management, and in particular, what those should look and feel like. Today, I'm in conversation with Rob Volpe, who is the CEO and Chief Catalyst at Ignite 360. Hi, Rob.
Hey, Peter. Good to meet you. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Now, before we begin, Rob, I'd like to ask you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and I'd love to know what a chief catalyst is, and a little bit about Ignite 360.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rob Volpe, I'm the CEO and Chief Catalyst, as well as the founder of Ignite 360. So we're an insights and strategy firm based over in the United States. Work with our clients to help them find the one big idea that's going to move their business forward. And typically that's through elevating human understanding so that they can find that untapped potential.
Great. And I know that you and I have a lot in common in that we're really trying to understand, why do people do what they do and what influences and affects them. Now, one of the things that we've talked about in the past about empathy is about leadership and empathy. And I often hear that leaders are still unempathetic, that they continue to behave in ways that lack compassion. So what's your thoughts? Is this what you're seeing? Do we have a load of sociopaths in the boardroom, or is it changing?
I can't say that they're all sociopaths, maybe some narcissists, maybe some psychopaths as well, and some normal people probably sprinkled in. But yeah, there's a real, there's an inflection point that's going on in the workforce right now where, you're seeing it here in the United States. There's a huge number of people that are leaving their jobs. And, some journalists will talk about it's this take this job and shove it effect, which is from an old song from I think the 70s or 80s. And people have seen the light. The pandemic has given people an opportunity to pause and reflect and think about what they really want and who they want to be and how they want to behave. And that isn't always aligned to corporations and what corporate needs are. And I think the tension that's come up is that you have a lot of leaders who were schooled in older ways of thinking. And I mean, just by nature of working your way up the corporate ladder, particularly if you're at a large multinational, you're going to be a little further along in your career in order to get to that place. And you might be, trained with some methods that are, or approaches and ways of thinking that are in need of refreshing. Some pause and reflection and thinking about how to be treated, because people want to be treated the way they want to be treated. It's kind of the golden rule, the way they would treat other people. And corporations haven't been used to that. The relationship had been very, well, this is the edict from on high and everybody should go and do and follow. And conform, and we've got a little hive of people doing all the same sorts of tasks, a lot of worker drones. But now there may still be worker drones, but they want better understanding. They want empathy from their leadership. They want consideration for their own personal situation and the flexibility to work in a way that is better suited for them and for their life. That for some people is going into the office 5 days a week. For others, it's about having a hybrid work schedule. Others, it's working at home all the time and working virtually. And it's been challenging, and this is just one situation, it's been challenging for leaders to kind of wrap their heads around that and how to approach it, how to address it, how to talk about it. Another situation would definitely be around diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Big topic over here, and I think in a lot of places around the world, and the ways that leaders are showing up and how are they promoting inclusion amongst their entire sort of team. And if the leaders aren't steeped in all of those awesome EQ skills, and in particular empathy, and really being able to see the point of view of somebody else, it's going to be really challenging for them to be effective in the 21st century and continue to be successful in their jobs. It isn't leadership by fiat anymore. It's really leadership by empathy.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point there, Rob. I think, yeah, I agree. You know, certainly in the early days of my management training, it was all about the production philosophy that came from the industrial era. You know, and I love that cliched, hackneyed term. You know, our people are our best asset, and then, you know, some of our leadership treated people like they were cells in a spreadsheet. They appeared on the balance sheet, and that was little more than we would expect from them. But I think that what the pandemic did was a big wake-up call for people. It was a real catalyst, I think, for some change that was already underway. But you had to think about well-being. You know, people perhaps weren't in great situations. They were working from home, and it may not have been suited for them. And I particularly liked that point you raised about diversity and inclusion and being able to think about other people. For me, that is not a spreadsheet exercise. You don't just simply count up how many kinds of people you've got in your organization as some arbitrary measure. You know, those people can have tremendous influence and impact, if for nothing else, that they perhaps bring a different point of view and a different perspective, which can create new opportunities, particularly as we're emerging into this new world. But one of the things I do want to touch upon is you mentioned empathy and EQ. Now, you know, I think a lot of us would say, well, you know, surely you can't train that. We're born with empathy, isn't it? Isn't it an innate thing of our humanity? Can it really be trained? Can it really be improved? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Can we train empathy? Can we improve the compassion and the way in which we translate what we feel into what we do as leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, empathy is something that everybody is born with, but I always liken it to being a muscle. And what happens, you know, you break your leg, you're not able to go walking around, you're tied up with a cast on, and the other muscles in the other leg, as well as the leg that you broke, atrophy and they weaken. And that's what's happened to our empathy muscle over, you know, decades of misuse and neglect in society. Is we've got some very limp, saggy empathy muscles that we need to strengthen and improve. And so, yes, it can be trained because it's about bringing awareness to people. There is a natural sort of empathetic response that people will have to maybe a situation, but you have to, I think, particularly in the workplace, you've got to bring awareness to people about being empathetic and how to actually get there. And I think that's the gap that we have identified. Is there's a lot of theoretical, like, oh, we've got to be more empathetic, but then the actual leap from that theory to the practice and what is it that you have to do yourself in order to get there was the thing that was missing. And so that's what we try to train, because we do believe that it is something that people can train so that they can strengthen their empathy muscles. And we see that playing out with our clients that have gone through our empathy training programs.
Yeah, I love that analogy of being a muscle that you need to continually exercise if you're not to let it atrophy. It was interesting, as you know, as you know, I'm also very interested in empathy, but slightly different point of view in that I'm looking at digital empathy. But as I'm sure you have, you go on the search engine, you put in corporate empathy, and you get tens of millions of hits. But when I talk to executives, they say, "Oh yeah, we absolutely want to, you know, do this empathy thing. Where can I buy it?" It's not really, you know, something which you can just take down off the shelf. As you say, we have an innate quality. I think the vast majority of people are by nature empathetic, but for too long we've subsumed that to you know, well, we need to be productive, or we need to be, you know, no, I can't help you because computer says no. And the true expression of empathy, of course, is compassion. When you do something, particularly if you do something different as a result of what you feel and what you believe the person you're dealing with is feeling. But I want to touch on one other thing. Yeah, we've obviously, all of us globally, have gone through a very torrid time for the last 15, 16 months. This, I think, is unique in our experience, something in living memory. Nobody's been here before. Nobody's lived through this, where it's not just us or our organization, but it's every other organization all around the world. And I'd like to, without stressing too much the nature of the pandemic, but just ask you, do you think that there's been more or less compassion displayed as a result of what's been happening? And if so, why? And I'm going to add another little bit to that. Do you think that's going to persist into the future?
Ooh, so many questions. I wanted to talk about that, but I want to go back to something that you said, if I may, around corporate empathy and leaders saying, yeah, we want that. Where can I buy it? And the analogy that comes to mind, continuing on with it's a muscle you can train. It's like, okay, great. So you're going to hire a personal trainer and do one workout session with them, and then you think you're going to be able to compete in the Olympics? No, it's something you've got to, or even in the local community race. No, you need to be continuing to do that. You've got to get the tools. You have to understand, if you continue with a training analogy, you've got to understand proper form, posture, technique, and then continue to practice that. And that's the trick with empathy, with any sort of skill. You've got to continue to use it in order to master it and to be good at it and for it to become second nature. So I think there's, and that's where this runs into people's learning of behaviors from the 50s, 60s, 70s, the Mad Men style approach, where men weren't supposed to be emotional leaders, or not emotional leaders are strong. And that means not showing emotion. And that's part of the huge change that we're seeing is, no, leaders actually can be strong. You can show emotion, you can show vulnerability and still lead, as long as you've built up trust with your people so that they are following you. So into, oh God, getting old and it's early here. Tell me the question that you asked me.
It was about the pandemic. Do you think?
Oh yes, the pandemic. What has the pandemic done? You have to think about, if you think about community, and empathy is about how you move through your community. And it can be the community of your house, it can be your street, your neighborhood, your town, to your country, and then society, and on a global sort of level. The pandemic, what we've seen in the studies that we've been doing around the pandemic, and we have an ongoing tracker where we talk to American adults qualitatively, and then have some quant data as well, and been following them for since April of 2020 now. But what we've seen is the pandemic has given people this time to pause and reflect and really think about who they want to be. And so, are people being more empathetic or showing more compassion? Depends on the level of community or that kind of area that you're talking about. I think, from a societal perspective, we're still pretty divided, right, left, vaccine, no vaccine, all the different things. But on a smaller community level, and that's where you will typically, a neighborhood or a town, that's where you usually see people coming together and helping each other out. And I think another community that I didn't mention would be the workplace. You're spending so much of your time at work. And thinking about our clients, we've seen a range of clients coming together to support each other and to figure out how to support one another best and what everybody needs. I recall I had an offsite with some of my team back in July, and it was, we got the reaction when we were seeing some of us for the first time ever in person. We'd only seen each other through this like Zoom filter or frame. And so we're meeting up. It's like, wow, you're taller than I thought you were, or you look younger than I thought you did. And, you're like, well, what's going on with my Zoom that's making that happen? And I did a post on LinkedIn about it. And one of my clients commented that her team had actually said when they do get together in person, they are not making any comments about that, because it's one thing to be taller or younger or older, but there's also weight and there's body image, and the sensitivities that people have. And, God knows we've all probably gained 10 pounds during the pandemic from stress eating. People are sensitive about that. There's a reason why we're not wanting to put our work clothes back on, because in a lot of cases they don't fit. And so that's a form of empathy. It's understanding, okay, I see your point of view. You may not be comfortable talking about this, so let's not talk about it until we can find a way to address it as a collective sort of group. So I would say, yes, there is more of it. There's hunger for empathy. We're seeing more of that coming out. I'm hearing it in conversations that I'm having, like there's a moment where we're really ready to have this. And I think, on the political spectrum, after everything that we've gone through in the United States over the last 4 years and in other countries as well, but particularly with our change in administration and the events of January 6th, it really shocked a lot of people, and it has left some people going, wait, we need to really rethink how we're doing things and how we're listening to people ultimately. And you need to listen in order to get to empathy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rob. And I think you've raised a couple of interesting points there. So, empathy, I absolutely get it, but yeah, and it's something I have to work at every day. For me, it doesn't come very naturally. I sometimes look at the rest of humanity like an outsider and say, I really don't understand what's going on. But you can recognize feelings of others, and ultimately it needs to change something within yourself or your organization. It's when you express the empathy as compassion, as action, I think it's really important. Now, I know that you've got a new book coming out, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. So you could tell us a little bit about your book. And by the way, for folks, if you want to know where to get it, it'll be in the comments. So it's on pre-order at the moment. But Rob, tell us a little bit about the book. Who's it for and what's it about?
I've written it for a wide audience. It's in that sort of personal growth, personal development space. It is about empathy, and it is focused on how to be more empathetic. It's about the 5 steps to empathy. The title of the book is Tell Me More About That, Solving the Empathy Crisis One Conversation at a Time. Comes out February 22nd, 2022. It is available for pre-order now, wherever books are sold. And I use my own personal story and experience in understanding empathy and the things that get in my way to being empathetic. And largely through my experiences going and interviewing people on market research projects. That's where a lot of that, because you're meeting strangers, you're bumping into people that are very different, unusual situations, or I've got clients with me and they've got their own judgment and other things that are coming up. And so I use those stories to bring to life different lessons and how to be empathetic. And it breaks down the 5 steps to empathy. And the first one being dismantle judgment, then asking good questions, active listening, integrating into your understanding, and finally use solution imagination. So it's but written not for necessarily a business audience. Business people will enjoy it because they're human, and it is written for a general audience. So very engaging. I've gotten some really lovely feedback so far.
Great. Thanks very much, Rob. February 22nd next year, day after my birthday. Hint, hint.
Ooh, nice.
But I think actually that's a great point to end on, because as you say, it's for people, but ultimately businesses are made up of people. It's very easy for us to forget that. We can automate a lot, but at the end of the day, all business is exchanges between people, whether they're suppliers, customers, or employees. So having the emotional intelligence, the empathy to be able to play a better game at that, uprate your game, I think is going to be so important. So now, as I said, if people would like to pre-order it, look at the link in the comments. But with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much, Rob. We're going to have another conversation, I'm sure, very soon, because we have so much in common. But I hope everybody else has enjoyed this episode of the Digital Empathy Lounge. If you would like to find out how to be a speaker, then please do look in the comments. There's details there. But with that, all that remains for me to do is to say thank you once again, Rob. It's been an absolute pleasure, and goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Peter.